You know, in the long history of Yu-Gi-Oh, some decks win with just overwhelming power, right? And some win with these insane explosive combos. But there's always been this other path, a path of pure strategy, patience, and eventually just absolute dominance. I'm talking about control decks, and they are, without a doubt, one of the most intellectually demanding ways to play this game ever. This is a story of how slowing the game down became the ultimate power move. Let's get into it.
And look, if you really want to understand what control is all about, you have to start with this card right here, Yata-garasu. This one, Little Spirit Monster, created a strategy so oppressive, so unbelievably soul-crushing, that it literally forced Konami to create the game's first ever forbidden and limited list. This wasn't just some powerful card, it was a lock that changed Yu-Gi-Oh! Forever. So how did one little bird completely warp the game? What does it really mean to grind out a win? And can a patient strategy like this still hang in today's super fast meta? Well, in this explainer, we're going to answer all of that and more. We'll start with that infamous lock. Then we'll dive into the philosophy of the grind, break down what makes Control different from other decks, trace its journey through time, see how it's surviving today, and finally, ask why you might want to master this incredible archetype. Okay, so let's set the scene. Picture this. It's 2003. We're at the first ever Yugioh TCG World Championship in New York City. The game is still young, but this new, absolutely suffocating strategy is starting to take over. Hand control. And the goal wasn't just to beat your opponent, no. It was to systematically tear apart their ability to even play the game at all. Now, at the very heart of this strategy was this trinity of just devastatingly powerful spell cards. For a tiny life point cost, you could just look at your opponent's hand and take their best cards away. Delinquent Duo ripped 2 cards out. Forceful Sentry would put 1 back in their deck, which was almost worse. And Confiscation, it just let you pick their absolute best card and chuck it in the graveyard. I mean, it was just brutal, incredibly efficient, and it left your opponents with pretty much no way to fight back. And that brings us right back to the lock itself. The game plan was terrifyingly simple. Clear your opponent's board, shred their hands with that trinity of spells, and then summon yata-garasu. See, when Yata attacked directly, your opponent wasn't allowed to draw a card on their next turn. So if they had no cards in hand and no monsters, well, that was it. Game over. They could literally never draw a card again. This created situations that were impossible to win and forced a huge change in how the game was designed, leading directly to the creation of the ban list. So after the Yata lock was finally broken up by that new ban list, the game kind of shifted. It went from this raw, unfair oppression to something with a lot more strategic nuance. And this led to what a ton of old-school players consider a golden age, the GOAT control format. It was still a control deck, for sure, but instead of a hard lock, it rewarded incredibly skillful resource management. You'd use cards like Scapegoat and Metamorphosis to bring out Thousand Eyes Restrict. This format wasn't about stopping your opponent from playing. It was about outthinking them and out-resourcing them over many, many turns. Okay, so this brings us to the core philosophy of control. You know, if an aggro player is like a boxer, just looking for that one-punch knockout, the control player is a chess master. They're managing the flow of the entire duel, thinking 5-10 turns ahead, and setting up an inevitable checkmate. It's not about speed at all. It's all about precision. So the first pillar of this whole philosophy is what we call incremental advantage. You're not trying to win with one giant flashy turn. No, instead you're focused on these small, efficient trades. Maybe you use one of your cards to answer one of theirs. But then your engine starts to kick in, think of decks like Labyrinth or Eldritch, and you start generating what we call +1s, getting more cards than you're using up. These tiny little gains just snowball over time until your opponent is totally out of resources and you're sitting there with a full hand. Now this right here is absolutely crucial. A really common mistake is thinking that control decks are supposed to stop everything. They don't. A great control player practices selective denial. They let the small, unimportant plays go through. They're waiting, they're watching, trying to identify that one critical choke point in their opponent's strategy, the one search, the one summon that makes the whole thing work. And they stop that. It's all about knowing what truly matters and saving your best answers for that exact moment. And finally, there's this idea of inevitability. This is the quiet confidence a control player has. They just know that if they can survive the early onslaught and stabilize the game, their engine is simply better at generating resources over the long haul. They don't need to rush. The longer the duel goes on, the more the odds shift in their favor until victory is basically a mathematical certainty. And this quote, it just perfectly captures the entire mindset. Every single decision you make on turn 2, what you choose to negate, what resources you commit to the board, it's all done with the goal of making sure you win on turn 10. You're not just playing the board that's in front of you, you're playing the entire arc of the game.
All right, so this is where a lot of players can get kind of confused. The term control gets thrown around all the time, but it has a really specific meaning. So let's sharpen those lines and figure out what separates control from other similar sounding strategies.
First up, control versus stun. A stun deck's whole goal is to just flip over a floodgate. You know, a card like Skill Drain or There Can Be Only One, and just stop the opponent from playing altogether. It's rigid. It's a brick wall that just says no. Control, on the other hand, is flexible. It uses targeted interactions, things like hand traps or specific removal spells, to manage the game, not shut it down completely. It keeps the game flowing, but it's always on its own terms. Next up, control versus mid-range. Now, this is a subtle difference, but it's all about tempo. A mid-range deck wants to put both a threat and some form of disruption on the board on its very first turn. It's trying to play offense and defense at the same time. A true control deck is way more patient. It focuses almost purely on defense at first. It weathers the storm, exhausts all of the opponent's resources, and then, once the coast is clear, it pivots to actually winning the game.
And finally, the classic matchup, control versus combo. This is the most straightforward distinction of them all. A combo deck has one single goal: successfully execute its powerful, often game-winning sequence of plays. The control deck's entire game plan is the exact opposite of that, to prevent that line of play from ever happening in the first place. One is proactive, the other is reactive. It's a total clash of philosophies.
So, with all those principles in mind, let's take a little trip through the last 2 decades and see how the face of control has changed, adapting to every major shift in the game's long history. So if you look at this timeline, you can actually see the game's power level evolving right before your eyes. We start back in 2003 with the raw, kind of unfair power of hand control and the yata-lock. Once that got banned, the game entered that golden age of skill with goat control. Then, around 2008, the focus shifted to monsters that could control the board themselves, like the gladiator beasts. But the biggest change of all came between 2013 and 2015 with the hand trap revolution. All of a sudden, your opponent's turn was no longer safe because interaction could happen right from the hand. This completely changed the tempo of the game and brings us to where we are today, where the lines are really blurry. Modern decks often have to be both a control deck and a combo deck, blending disruption with their own powerful ways to win just to survive. And yeah, that brings us to today. In a metagame that's defined by just breakneck speed and boards with like 5 negates, how does a patient, reactive strategy like control even survive, let alone thrive? Well, the answer is simple: adaptation. See, modern control isn't about setting one trap card and just passing the turn. It has to be able to navigate these unbelievably complex board states. Today's decks can spit out multiple threats at once, so control strategies need answers that can do more than just one thing. You can't just have a card that destroys a monster anymore. You need cards like Infinite Impermanence that can negate an effect and turn off a whole column, or a Labyrinth's Trap that can destroy a card and trigger your own engine at the same time. And each of these modern engines you see here is basically a masterclass in one of those core principles we talked about. Labyrinth is a master of incremental advantage, just constantly looping its traps from the deck and graveyard. Runic is a pure selective denial engine, using its quick play spells to pick apart an opponent's strategy. And Eldritch is the king of inevitability, a recurring boss monster that just refuses to stay in the graveyard. They all have their own unique flavor, but they all share that same core control DNA. So after all of this, you might be wondering, why would you choose to master this difficult, super demanding playstyle? Well, because the rewards, both in terms of your competitive advantage and your own personal skill, are just immense. Let's talk matchups for a second. While, the specific numbers are always changing with the format, tournament data consistently shows that well-piloted control decks are the ultimate punishers. When a combo player gets greedy, when they commit all their resources to the board and don't respect your back row, they are playing right into your hands. Top-level tournament reports often put the win rate for a prepared control deck in that exact scenario somewhere north of 75%. Now, that's not a guarantee, but it represents a fundamental truth of this game. Control is the natural predator of carelessness, and that is a huge strategic advantage. And what about the mental game? Think about a typical combo deck's turn. They have a set line they want to follow.
Now think about the control player. On every single action the opponent takes, you have to ask yourself, do I respond to this? Is this the choke point? Or should I save my interaction for whatever comes next? This creates an incredible number of critical decision points in a single game, often a dozen or more moments where making the wrong choice flat out loses you the duel. You just can't autopilot a strategy like this. It demands constant, draining focus. This difference in philosophy becomes crystal clear in the mirror match. When two combo decks face off, the game's usually over in a few explosive turns. But when two master control players sit down, the duel just transforms. It becomes this slow, methodical grind where neither player is willing to commit anything unless it provides a clear advantage. These games can easily go to time in tournaments, lasting way longer than the average matchup. It's really a testament to the supreme patience that defines the archetype, a true battle of wits. So here's the bottom line. Mastering control isn't just about learning a deck. It's about developing these core mental skills. You learn to spot those choke points, to track every card your opponent uses, to manage the pace of the game, to figure out which threats actually matter, and to have the discipline not to overextend yourself. And these skills, they're universal. They will make you a better player no matter what deck you decide to pick up in the future. So for any of you out there who are inspired to start this journey, here's your roadmap. First, just fall in love with the art of disruption. Learn to anticipate what your opponent is going to do and stop them with surgical precision. Second, become completely obsessed with resource management. Every single card is precious. Learn to use your answers at the perfect moment. And finally, your goal is to outsmart your opponent. Control rewards strategic thinking way more than it rewards raw power. Ultimately, control decks teach us probably the most valuable lesson in competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! The player who controls the flow of the game controls the outcome. So as the game gets faster and flashier, the most important question for any duelist will always be, do you have the patience, the foresight, and the discipline to truly control the victory?